You are gods. Introduction. Since time immemorial, humanity has wandered the threshold of its own ignorance, convinced of its orphanhood in a vast and indifferent universe. Yet, our greatest tragedy has never been our insignificance in the face of the cosmos, but the severing of our own heritage. A veil was drawn over our eyes, a grand deception devouring civilization after civilization, faith after faith. The world is an illusion, but you are real, said Ramana Maharshi. And yet most of humanity has lived trapped in a grand performance, worshipping shadows and mistaking reflections for light. Every lie needs a stage, and ours was built from the most insidious material of all, the belief in separation. They told us the Creator was in the heavens while we remained below, that there were gods and men, rulers and the ruled. That knowledge was a privilege for the few, while ignorance was the fate of the many. Yet the Corpus Hermeticum declares, God is the totality of all things. There is nothing that is not Him, and nothing exists outside of Him. So tell me, how could man ever have been cast out of Eden if he never left the body of God? How could he be distant from what he has always been? The great deception was never humanity's fall, but the invention of a story in which man must redeem himself from a sin that never existed. Like a prisoner who believes the bars are real, we have forgotten that the cage is nothing more than the projection of a domesticated mind. The Gospel of Thomas warns, ignorance is the mother of all evil. And it was ignorance that led mankind to forget that he himself is the source, the spark, the creative word. The fall was never physical, it was conceptual. It was not a punishment, but a spell. From Babylon to the Council of Nicaea, from the pharaonic dynasties to modern power structures, history is the story of a few who understood the nature of consciousness and molded it so the masses would believe their only option was to kneel. Yet, the Emerald Tablet whispers its eternal truth, as above, so below, as within, so without. Does this not imply that divinity is not something external, but something woven into every being who breathes, that the macrocosm and microcosm are mere reflections of the same essence? The greatest deception has never been visible control, but the deeper lie, that man believes he must seek permission to awaken. He fears gods instead of remembering that he is his own architect. For even Psalm 82 proclaims, "You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you." So tell me, what power could ever prevent us from reclaiming what has always been ours? But deception has never been absolute. Like a secret code sealed in our ancestral memory, the mystical and esoteric traditions have preserved the immutable truth, hidden in symbols, whispered through time. Krishna revealed in the Bhagavad Gita, a man becomes what he thinks of constantly. And in this principle lies the very key that was erased from dogmatic religions, the key that unlocks the prison. Reality is not a fixed destiny, but a perpetual act of creation. If the word is the seed of the world, what happens when man speaks in a language that is not his own? When he repeats dogmas without question? When he proclaims his misery instead of his divinity? As Jesus said in the Gospel of Philip, "When we were Hebrews, we were orphans, but in the truth we have found our inheritance." It is not history that defines us, but the stories we tell ourselves. This message is not here to convince you, nor to impose or seduce with easy promises. It is not a new doctrine, it is a beacon, not a new gospel, but the memory of something long buried. And above all, it is not external knowledge, but the reflection of something that has always burned within you, waiting to be remembered. Because if the deception has been great, then far greater shall be the revelation. Chapter 1. Man was already divine. The reflection of man upon the water has always been a trap. He gazes upon it, believing he sees himself, yet the image is never truly his, always shifting, fragmented, an illusion undone by the slightest ripple. The myth of Narcissus was never about vanity, but about the soul's exile in the mirage of matter. How long has humanity stared at its own distorted reflection, mistaking it for reality? When did it become convinced that this fractured image was all it could ever be? Before the deception took form, Before words became chains and truth a privilege hoarded in secrecy, man did not see himself as lesser than the gods, because there was no separation between them. "You are that," declares the Chandogya Upanishad, a simple phrase holding the entirety of consciousness that was stolen from us. For man was never apart from the One. He never needed to evolve toward divinity. He never required enlightenment. His only sin was forgetting. The Gnostics taught that in the beginning, the spark of spirit existed in perfect union with the whole, like a drop indistinguishable from the ocean. There were no unreachable heavens, no celestial beings governing eternity. As above, so below, as within, so without. So speaks the Emerald Tablet, revealing that there is no real distinction between the cosmos and man, except the one imposed upon us by the veils of perception, and yet a shadow arose. A deception so subtle it transformed perception into captivity. The world was rewritten, not as an infinite field of creation, but as a prison of limitations. Man was not told that his consciousness shapes reality, but that he must submit to a preordained structure. And so the cult of the external was born, the submission to forces outside oneself, the worship of idols and dogmas, the replacement of the self with a mold designed to diminish it. "You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you," proclaims Psalm 82:6, but the world remembers only the next line, "But you will die like mere men." The fall was never physical, it was conceptual. It was not punishment but domestication. Man never ceased to be divine, he was simply convinced that he was not. And so began the age of priests, the era of intermediaries, of laws decreeing what could be remembered and what must be erased. The primordial fire of inner divinity was replaced by fear, and where once there was certainty, only blind faith remained. The voice of the Spirit was silenced beneath the weight of distorted scriptures, of dogmas that claimed the path to the divine could only be walked through obedience. But throughout history, the truth refused to be buried. It echoed through the Eleusinian mysteries, in the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, in the Gnostic fragments hidden in caves and ruins. Over and over the same message resounded: man does not need salvation, only awakening. "The kingdom is within you and all around you," proclaimed Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas. How could one seek God in stone temples when eternity already resided within? Why kneel before idols when the divine essence is present in every heartbeat, every thought, every word? The greatest deception was not making man believe in external gods. It was convincing him that his own power was blasphemy. Because if man were to remember his true nature, no chains could hold him. No authority would be great enough to subjugate a consciousness fully awakened. Fear itself would dissolve, because fear can only exist in one who believes himself incomplete. And yet, the cage was never real. It never was. Like Plato's prisoner, staring at shadows on the cave wall, man has always had the choice to turn around, to seek the source of the light instead of mistaking its projection for reality. For awakening is not a process of acquiring knowledge, but of stripping away illusion. It is not about learning something new, but unlearning the conditioning that has obscured what was always present. When man knows himself, he will know that he is immortal, and that death has no power over him. So speaks the Corpus Hermeticum. The true initiation is not about receiving external teachings, but about remembering what is already written in the soul. Man was already divine before anyone told him he was not. His journey home is not an ascension, it is a return to what he never ceased to be. So what prevents his awakening? What keeps him shackled to the illusion of smallness? The answer is simple, but accepting it is the final test. The prisoner clings to his cage because he fears the vastness beyond it. He has lived so long believing himself a beggar that he has forgotten how to walk as a king. But the moment has come. The voices of the ancients call out once more. The cage is an idea, and like all ideas, it can be destroyed. Man was already divine. All that remains is for him to remember. Chapter 2. The Great Illusion. The Fall That Never Was. There was a time when the concepts of I and you did not exist, a time when the totality of being knew no fragmentation, No boundaries between heaven and earth, between matter and spirit, between creator and creation. All was an ocean without shores, a river flowing without resistance. Unity was the original nature of existence. But then, something happened. The book of Genesis speaks of a moment when man was cast out of paradise, not for an act of disobedience, but for acquiring a knowledge that separated him from his true essence. Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Yet it was not the loss of Eden that condemned humanity, but the illusion of separation, the idea that man was no longer part of the whole. The moment consciousness split into duality, the fall began. The ancient Gnostics understood that the greatest deception was not disobedience but the belief in an external God, a creator distinct from the self. In the lost Gospels of Nag Hammadi, an echo of this truth remains. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty itself. The original sin was never the transgression of a rule, but the forgetting of divine identity. Like a shattered mirror, humanity's fragmented consciousness reflected countless distorted images, none of them whole. The I was born the moment totality was replaced with individual identity. Where once the self was immutable and eternal, it became confined to a fleeting mask of time. It was then that the human mind began to perceive a world of opposites, light and shadow, spirit and matter, time and eternity. But all of these were merely projections, flickering shadows on the walls of Plato's cave, illusions born from the veil of perception. The ancient Hermeticists grasped this truth and captured it in the words of Hermes Trismegistus. All things are one, and the separation between them is only an illusion of thought. But thought became a tyrant, and humanity, once boundless, began to believe in the borders it had drawn. From unity arose multiplicity. From harmony was born contradiction. And so, consciousness descended into the prison of matter, convinced that exile was its destiny. In the Corpus Hermeticum, the divine Poimandres unveils a profound mystery. I descended and saw great confusion. I heard a voice cry from the abyss, I am the fire that burns in all things, but no one recognizes me. The divine spark never vanished, but man stopped seeing it. Ensnared in the illusion that something external had to be sought, he began to worship false gods. Thus arose religions, temples of stone, blood offerings, and the sacrifice of the self to deities that were nothing but shadows. Separation became dogma. Man, once a creator, became a servant. Yet, in the whispers of the world's oldest traditions, another truth was guarded. The fall was never a real descent, but a deep sleep. The Kabbalists speak of Tzimtzum, the contraction of divinity to make room for the world. But God did not abandon his creation, he hid within it. The void is not the absence of the sacred, but its disguise. What we call the world is nothing more than the veiled manifestation of divinity, a hall of mirrors where the one appears to have lost itself. Taoism also understood this at its core. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of all things. The moment something receives a name, it is severed from the whole, and its exile begins. The Mesoamerican shamans were aware that everything is an emanation of awareness, and that reality is merely a dream. In his Lessons with Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda refers to this procedure as stopping the world. The conceptual framework that persuades us that we are distinct vanishes when the world is stopped, leaving only the immediate sense of oneness. Therefore, the real first sin was a perceptional fracture rather than a moral shortcoming. Consciousness turned into an independent entity the instant it lost its sense of belonging to the whole. Fear of dying, fear of loneliness, dread of uncertainty, was born out of that one notion. However, the big deception that everything can be separated from its source is reflected in all of these worries. If separation was the fall, then redemption is nothing more than a return to unity. Not through worship of an external God, not through submission to imposed laws, but through the dissolution of the self into the infinite ocean of consciousness. This is not a path of learning, but of unlearning. It is not about accumulating wisdom, but about shedding everything that has been imposed upon the mind. Buddha understood this when he attained enlightenment. He did not discover something new, he simply saw through the illusion of individuality. The self is a mirage, like the moon reflected in water. It appears real, but has no substance. And in that realization, the entire structure of separation collapses. The ego is nothing more than an idea upheld by centuries of false belief. Man never fell from paradise because he disobeyed. He fell because he believed he had fallen. He saw himself as something other than the whole, and with that single thought, he drifted from what he had always been. The only way back is to remember. To remember that there was never a fall, only a dream. And if it was all an illusion, then what happens when man awakens? What remains when separation dissolves and only the one remains? The end of the journey is not the discovery of a new truth, but the revelation that it has always been here. So the question is no longer, how does man regain his lost divinity? The question is humanity ready to wake up? Chapter 3. The Forbidden Knowledge. You are gods. There was once a time when words were not mere sounds but keys, when those who knew the true names of things could command them, shape them, transmute them. In the ancient world, language did not merely describe reality, it created it. The earliest civilizations feared hidden knowledge, not because it was dangerous in itself, but because to possess it was to challenge the gods. Yet buried within the scriptures, in a passage read and forgotten countless times, lies a revelation so profound that, if understood, would shatter the foundations of history. I have said, you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. Psalm 82:6. A single sentence, both simple and immeasurable, containing within it a truth that would unravel the entire illusion upon which the world was built. It is not a metaphor. It is not a poetic consolation for believers. It is a declaration, absolute and undeniable. Man is divine, not because he must ascend to godhood, but because he already is that which he seeks. But this truth was buried, erased, transformed into a distant echo that barely lingers in the subconscious of humanity. The ancient mystics and Gnostics understood that the greatest heresy was not defying religious authority, but daring to remember. Because to remember meant to see, to recognize that the distance between man and the divine was nothing but an illusion, a veil woven from dogma and fear. In the Gospel of Thomas, a voice whispers from the depths of forgotten wisdom, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This is the secret. Knowledge is not something granted from the outside. It is unearthed from within. The forbidden is not what is hidden in ancient texts, but what lies dormant in the heart of every human being. The Corpus Hermeticum echoes the same revelation when Hermes Trismegistus declares, "Man is a mortal god, and the gods are immortal men." There is no true difference between the two, only degrees of awakening. But those who understood this were hunted, their writings burned, and their wisdom was replaced with submission. Because if humanity knew that divinity was already its birthright, then what power could ever rule over it? Primitive Christianity, before it was tamed by councils and empires, still carried the flame of this knowledge. Jesus himself, accused of blasphemy, did not speak of worship. He did not call for blind faith. Instead, he repeated the ancient words of Psalm 82 in John 10:34. "Is it not written in your law, I have said, you are gods?" His message was never about bowing before the divine, but about remembering that each soul was already part of it. The first followers of the path knew that salvation was not something to be given by another, but a light that had to be discovered within oneself. And that truth was dangerous. The Gnostics understood that man's greatest enemy was never some external force of evil. It was not Satan, it was not sin, it was forgetfulness. In the Gospel of Philip it is written, Ignorance is the mother of all evil. What you do not know enslaves you. What you know sets you free. And so began the great conspiracy against ancestral memory. The temples of knowledge were destroyed. The scriptures were rewritten. The ancient truths buried beneath centuries of superstition and fear. Yet, even in the darkest times, there were always those who refused to forget. On the margins of history, in the secret teachings of the mystics, in the whispers of the outcasts, the same truth resurfaced again and again. The Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes himself, speaks a truth that mirrors Psalm 82, "As above, so below, as within, so without." There is no separation between the human and the divine, only reflections of the same essence. But humanity was trained to look toward the heavens for an external God, never realizing that divinity already resided within them. The Kabbalists called this presence the Shekinah, the divine spark that does not exist outside of creation, but dwells within it. The wisdom of the Kabbalah teaches that man should not wait for redemption from above, but should realize that the entire universe is an unfolding of his own consciousness. God hides so that man may discover him within himself, say the Jewish sages. Yet religions took this message and twisted it into something unrecognizable. Obedience replaced enlightenment. Sacrifice replaced understanding. Hinduism, in its deepest teachings, preserved the same truth. In the Upanishads, one phrase resounds with the power of Psalm 82. Tat tvam asi, you are that. The individual soul is nothing less than an expression of Brahman, the totality of being. But to realize this, man must shed the illusion of his smallness. He must abandon the prison of the senses and the chains of conditioned thought. The Toltec shamans knew that the world was a perceptual agreement, a mental construct imposed upon reality. Carlos Castaneda, in his training with Don Juan, described how the seers of ancient Mexico could alter the structure of existence simply by ceasing to see themselves as limited beings. The trick is to realize you have never stopped being infinite, the old sorcerer taught. But this knowledge was ridiculed, minimized, masked as superstition, so that humanity would never reclaim its power. And so the question remains, if all knowledge, all wisdom, all ancient traditions point to the same truth, then why does mankind remain in chains? Because those who have ruled history understood one simple fact. A God who does not know he is a God is easier to control than a mere mortal. And so the idea of original sin was invented. Guilt was made eternal. The need for an intermediary between man and the divine was imposed. The gatekeepers of power established systems where only a chosen few could interpret the sacred, while the rest of humanity was told to submit in blind faith. But truth cannot be destroyed. It can only be forgotten. And in every age there are those who begin to remember. In the margins of sacred texts, in the forbidden manuscripts, in the teachings of heretics and exiled sages. The same idea rises from the depths of memory, again and again. Psalm 82 is not merely a verse. It is a testimony of what humanity has been forced to forget. And the question now hangs in the air, impossible to ignore. If man is already divine, what keeps him from reclaiming his throne? And more importantly, who benefits from ensuring that he never does? Chapter 4. The Power of the Word, Shaping Reality Through Sound. At the dawn of time, before man forgot his divine nature, words were not mere sounds. They were forces of creation. To speak was not to describe the world. It was to manifest it. Sound was not a fleeting echo, but the very essence that shaped existence itself. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So declares the Gospel of John, a phrase repeated countless times, yet rarely understood. It holds within it the key to a mystery that has been buried beneath dogma, veiled beneath doctrine, concealed beneath centuries of forgetfulness. The Word is not simply a means of communication. It is the principle of reality itself. The ancients knew this truth. In Egypt, the god Thoth spoke the world into existence, declaring each thing into being from the primordial ocean of none. In India, the Vedas speak of Vak, the primordial speech. a sacred vibration that the ancient seers, the rishis, could hear and translate into the mantras that gave order to the universe. The Kabbalists understood that the Hebrew alphabet was not a mere collection of symbols, but the vibrational framework upon which reality was constructed. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. But what was not told, what was deliberately obscured, was that this power was never exclusive to an external God. It is inherent in human consciousness. The emerald tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, whispers the eternal truth. As above, so below. As within, so without. If the universe was spoken into existence, then every thought given voice is a spark of that same creative force. Every word, every syllable, and every whispered phrase is an act of shaping reality. It is no coincidence that in mystical traditions names hold power. To speak a thing's true name is to wield control over it. To declare truth with conviction is to alter the very fabric of existence. The ancient Essenes, the hidden mystics of the Dead Sea Scrolls, understood this when they wrote, "There are two paths, one of light, one of darkness, and the tongue is the instrument of both, for he who masters the word masters the world." Yet modern man has been conditioned to speak without awareness, to scatter words into the void as if they held no weight, no consequence. Language has been stripped of its sacred power and reduced to a mere tool of expression, a careless stream of noise. But even science, in its limited understanding, has glimpsed the truth. The experiments of Dr. Masaru Emoto, studying the crystallization of water, revealed that words affect reality in ways unseen. When exposed to words of love, gratitude, and harmony, the molecules of water formed intricate, breathtaking patterns, geometry that mirrored the order of creation itself. Yet when subjected to words of hatred, anger, and fear, the molecular structure fractured into chaos. And if words can alter water, what do they do to the human mind, to the body, to the universe itself? The Kybalion, one of the foundational texts of Hermetic wisdom, declares, "The all is mind." If reality is mental, then the word, the bridge between thought and manifestation, is the most powerful tool in the arsenal of the human spirit. But it is not enough to merely speak. The true power lies in vibration, in the intention carried within the words. The Vedic mantras are not random incantations. They are not prayers in the conventional sense. They are formulas, resonances that align the individual with the rhythm of the cosmos itself. The Aum, the primordial sound, is not a concept, but a frequency, a vibration that, when chanted, tunes the consciousness to the eternal pulse of the universe. The Gospel of Thomas, a text cast aside by Orthodox tradition, reveals a secret that echoes through time. If what comes out of your mouth comes from your heart, it will save you. But if what comes out of your mouth does not come from your heart, it will destroy you. Here lies the essence of conscious creation. Words only hold power when it is spoken with awareness, purpose, and knowledge. To repeat hollow phrases, to mutter prayers without belief, to chant invocations without emotion, this is not creation. This is noise. The true magic of the word lies in the fusion of thought, emotion, and vibration. The Toltec shamans of ancient Mesoamerica also understood this. For them, the impeccability of one's word was the key to power. Don Miguel Ruiz, the inheritor of this wisdom, wrote of the first agreement, "Be impeccable with your word. Use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love." Every word spoken is a seed planted in the field of reality. To speak in fear and doubt is to sow chains, to bind oneself in an invisible prison. To speak with clarity and certainty is to open doors that once seemed sealed shut. In Hermetic rituals, knowing the secret names of the divine was essential. In the esoteric traditions of Kabbalah, alchemical lore, and the mysteries of the ancients, the true names of things were never mere labels. They were frequencies that contained the essence of that which they named. The tetragrammaton, YHVH, was never just a word. It was a formula, a vibrational key to align the initiated with the creative forces of the universe. Yet, in the modern world, words have been trivialized, language has been corrupted, It has been weaponized not to expand consciousness but to limit it. George Orwell in 1984 warned of newspeak, a language designed not to enhance thought but to shrink it, because he who controls the meaning of words controls the perception of reality. This is the true war being waged today, not a war of armies but a war of narratives. Humanity has been taught to speak without thinking, to forget that every word is a decree, that every phrase uttered is a contract with the universe. And so the inevitable question arises, how does one reclaim the power of the word? How does one return to the awareness that every syllable spoken shapes existence itself? The answer lies in intention, in the act of speaking with full consciousness, with the knowledge that what is spoken becomes real. It is not about mindlessly repeating affirmations, but about feeling each word resonate as truth. To speak with awareness is to wield power. To speak with fear is to chain oneself deeper into illusion. In the book of Revelation it is said, "Out of his mouth came a sharp, double-edged sword." The word is that sword. It can create or destroy. It can liberate or enslave. It can bring forth light or deepen the shadows. And if all existence is vibration, if the universe is sound made manifest, then to reclaim the power of the word is to remember that each of us is a living word, an embodied frequency, a voice capable of shaping reality itself. But the question remains, are we ready to bear the weight of our words, or will we continue to speak without thought, without feeling, without knowing, unaware that with every sound we utter we weave the very fabric of our existence? Chapter 5. Echoes of the Eternal, the Hidden Wisdom Across Ages. Since time immemorial, knowledge has traveled in whispers, passed from voice to voice, concealed in symbols and myths. These were never mere stories meant to entertain or explain the world in simple terms. They were keys, fragments of a forgotten language, a lost map leading back to what humanity once knew but no longer remembers. Like a river that changes its course but never its essence, the truths of existence have taken many forms, cloaked in different names, woven into different traditions. And yet, beneath the surface, beneath the differences of culture and time, a single flame has burned through every teaching, every sacred text, every whispered revelation. Hermes Trismegistus's knowledge reverberated through the temple halls of ancient Egypt, its message transcending all boundaries. God is an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. God was not far away. It was a part of the world, nothing more. It vibrated in every particle of existence, permeating everything. The same concept was expressed in a different language centuries later in the Upanishads. Tattvam asi, you are that. The divine was something to be remembered rather than attained. It was the actual foundation upon which everything else was built, not some far-off promise. The mystics of Kabbalah, the secret keepers of esoteric Judaism, encoded this knowledge into the tree of life, a blueprint of the soul's journey back to its origin. In the Zohar, it is written that before creation, infinite light filled all existence. But for manifestation to occur, that light had to contract. Here lies a profound mystery. The illusion of separation was not a punishment, but a necessary veil, making experience possible. The descent into the material world was never a fall, but a path to self-knowledge. The Gnostics, keepers of another forbidden wisdom, called it the pleroma, the original fullness from which humanity had been exiled, but not through sin, not through punishment, through forgetfulness. The Buddha, seated beneath the Bodhi tree, realized what the Vedic sages had already glimpsed. Reality is nothing more than the dance of the mind, a grand illusion woven from desires and fears. The Lankavatara Sutra speaks of this truth in simple yet devastating clarity. Just as fire has no existence without fuel, the phenomenal world has no existence apart from consciousness. The ego is the veil, the lens that fractures the indivisible into fragments, making the one appear as many. According to the Tao Te Ching, the ancient Taoist sage Lao Tzu cautioned, "The Tao that can be named is not the true Tao." Since all definitions are just limitations, the ultimate truth is beyond language. The Tao, however, is not some celestial force that exists outside of the universe. The development of trees, the movement of the stars, and the flow of water all exhibit it. The person who comprehends this ceases looking for the sacred in scriptures and temples and starts to discover it in each breath and every instant. Even the shamans of the Americas, with no access to the Vedic texts and no knowledge of the Gnostics or Taoists, arrived at the same understanding. They listened not to books, but to the silence of the jungle, to the language of spirits, to the rhythms of the earth. To the Toltecs, reality had two faces: the Nagual, the unknown, the unseen, the formless, and the tonal, the manifested world, the known, the temporary illusion. They whispered the same truth that sages across the world had discovered. Everything you see is a dream within a dream. And this was no mere metaphor. It was a truth so profound that only those who had broken the chains of perception could grasp it. The world of the senses was only a thin veil over something vast, something immeasurable. Even in the oldest myths of humanity, echoes of this lost knowledge remain. In the Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Maya, the gods fashioned the first men from corn, but before giving them limitations, they were beings of pure light, capable of seeing beyond time and space, beyond form and illusion. They had no veil over their eyes. They saw all that was hidden, and so the gods, fearing their power, took their vision away. Again and again the same theme appears: the fall from grace, the loss of power, the need for awakening. The Norse myths tell of Odin hanging from the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 nights, sacrificing himself to himself. From his torment wisdom was born, the runes, the hidden symbols of the cosmos, the keys to forgotten knowledge. Odin's sacrifice was not to another being, but to his own higher self. And in this, we see the same Hermetic principle repeated. The awakening only occurs when one realizes that there is no divinity outside of oneself. What do all these traditions tell us? That truth has never belonged to one people, one religion, one time in history. It has been whispered in all tongues, on all continents, waiting for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. And yet, humanity has chosen to cling to dogma. It has built walls between beliefs that are nothing more than mirrors reflecting the same wisdom. If Buddha, Hermes, Jesus, Lao Tzu, and the shamans of old all spoke of the same truth, why do their followers insist on seeing differences? If each one in their own way pointed toward the same reality, why does mankind still search outside for what has always been within? Perhaps the greatest deception of all has been convincing the world that truth is inaccessible, that only the chosen few may reach it, that only certain texts and traditions contain the key. And yet, the evidence is everywhere, waiting to be recognized. There is no mystery greater than our own existence. No revelation is deeper than the simple act of waking up. And so the inevitable question arises: if all traditions have whispered the same truth across centuries, across civilizations, across the barriers of language and time, what is it that blinds us? Is it possible that the answer is not hidden in books or rituals, but in the willingness to see beyond prejudice, to listen without filters, to remember without fear? Chapter 6. The Return to Wholeness, Awakening from the Illusion of Separation. The shadow of forgetting has veiled human consciousness for eons, like fragments of a shattered mirror, each reflecting only a sliver of truth. We have wandered through the corridors of duality, convinced that we are separate from what we have always been, and yet, beneath the ruins of forgotten traditions, hidden within the whispers of the mystics, encoded in the silent geometry of creation, the message has remained unchanged. What appears divided is not so in essence, and what seems lost has never ceased to exist. The return to unity is not a journey outward, but an awakening to the reality that never ceased to be. From the beginning all was one. Before multiplicity, before the illusion of form, there was only the nameless, boundless, formless reality. The Upanishads whisper of this eternal truth. The separation is but a veil, an illusion cast by perception. The mind creates limits, draws borders, defines I and you. But what happens when the veil falls? Lao Tzu, in the Tao Te Ching, warned that when opposites cease to be seen as opposites, truth reveals itself effortlessly. The ancient mystics understood that duality is the game of perception, light and darkness, matter and spirit, good and evil. These are but shifting shadows on the wall of Plato's cave. And Plato himself left us the enigma. The soul is immortal and is often reborn. Nothing new can be discovered, only remembered. The path back to unity is not the acquisition of something external, but the remembrance of what already lies within. Hermetic wisdom speaks of this truth in its fundamental axiom, as above, so below. This is not mere symbolic poetry, but a revelation of the very structure of existence. The division between heaven and earth, between the visible and the invisible, is an illusion created by limited perception. The corpus hermeticum echoes the same realization. God is all things, yet none of the things that are. God is the unchanging, yet the source of all change. Gnostic teachings preserve this wisdom in their own way. The lost Nag Hammadi texts reveal that the fall of man was not a punishment, not a moral failure, but a descent into matter, an immersion into forgetfulness. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus speaks in veiled words, "When you make the two into one, and the inner like the outer, and the above like the below, then you will enter the kingdom." The key to return has always been the transcendence of the illusion of separation, to recognize the underlying oneness beneath all things. The Buddha, upon awakening beneath the Bodhi tree, did not establish a new religion, nor did he impose rigid doctrines. In his silence, he understood what the sages had whispered for ages. There is no path to enlightenment. Enlightenment is the path. The human mind, trapped in the illusion of linearity, believes it must travel great distances, accumulate knowledge, and achieve merits. But in the simplicity of a flower opening to the sun, in the stillness of a lake reflecting the moon, the hidden truth has always been present. Even in the shamanic traditions of the Americas, the knowledge of the return to wholeness has been preserved since ancient times. The Toltecs spoke of the Nagual, the unseen reality hidden behind the illusion of the material world. Don Juan Matus, teacher of Carlos Castaneda, revealed, "When man stops seeing himself as separate from the whole, his energy ceases to be scattered, and he aligns with the great current of the universe. It is not an act of will nor a product of the mind, but a surrender, a dissolving into the flow of the all." In Kabbalah, the great mystery of creation is described through the concept of tzimtzum, the contraction of infinite light to make space for existence. Yet the great mistake of humanity has been to see this contraction as separation. The Zohar warns, "The divine spark never disappeared. It only veiled itself behind perception." The return to wholeness is not about traveling to another place. It is the dissolving of the veils that obscure the truth. Like a fractal expanding and contracting, each tradition, each myth, each revelation has pointed to the same realization. Separation is sustained only as long as the observer believes in it. What happens when the eye that perceives ceases to see a distinction between the observed and the observer? In the mirror of the universe, the reflection and the source are one and the same. And yet, if this knowledge has always been available, if the sages, mystics, and visionaries across time have all whispered the same truth, why does humanity persist in its illusion? Why does it cling to its limits, its names, its flags, its creeds? Perhaps because the ego fears its own dissolution, because it has mistaken its existence for its separateness, perhaps because to remember unity is to be reborn, and every rebirth demands the death of the identity that once believed itself unique and permanent. At the end of the journey, when the river meets the ocean, there is no loss, only integration. There is no self that disappears, only a drop of water that remembers it has always been the sea. And in that moment, all questions dissolve, for there is no longer one to ask, and no longer anything to answer. Chapter 7. The Adversary, False Light, and the Final Illusion. The light that blinds can obscure more than darkness itself. Like a mirage shimmering in the desert, the illusion of truth is often the final veil that prevents one from seeing the real. Since the dawn of human consciousness, man has sought the light, convinced that all that glows is divine, and that all shadow is a curse. But what happens when the light does not guide but misleads? What if the adversary is not an enemy that opposes but an architect that weaves shadows to ensnare the unwise? The ancients spoke of a dual principle governing existence. In Persian tradition, Ahriman, the Lord of Darkness, was not merely the antagonist of Ahura Mazda, the luminous divinity, but a necessary reflection in the great game of reality. The Avesta proclaims, "I am the one who set the wheel of time into motion, and the one who cast the shadow over the world." A paradox that suggests that the very principle that gives rise to light also projects the shadow that defines it. The Corpus Hermeticum, in its cryptic language, whispers a forgotten truth. Wisdom is not in fleeing from the darkness, but in understanding its purpose. He who fears the shadow does not know the light, for only in shadow is its purity tested. The adversary, the one who deceives and tempts, is not a mere antagonist. He is the guardian of the threshold, the final veil before transcendence. The Gnostics called him the demiurge, the architect of illusion, the maker of the false world. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus reveals in secrecy, "The ruler of this world is blind, and he thinks himself God, but his light is only fire that consumes." Here lies the greatest deception, not in darkness, but in false light, the illusion that proclaims itself as the ultimate truth. If the adversary were simply an enemy, his role would be clear. But his purpose is far more insidious. He is the false teacher, the radiant figure who offers enlightenment, but only leads further into the labyrinth. Is the adversary, then, not the greatest of all hidden masters? In Kabbalistic tradition, Samael, the angel of obstacles, is also the angel of severity, the one who tests the righteous to make them worthy of the path. The Zohar states, "The adversary is the hand of God clothed in shadows. He is not the destroyer, but the fire that purifies." The spiritual trap does not only lie in that which opposes, it is found in something far more subtle, false illumination. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha warns, "The greatest enemy of the wise is not the demon, but the illusion of wisdom that makes him believe he has arrived." How many seekers have been trapped in reflections of truth, never realizing that they are still within a prison? In the Gospels, Jesus spoke words that few truly grasped. "If the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" Matthew 6:23. Not all light is salvation. Not all darkness is damnation. How many have followed false prophets glowing like stars, yet whose radiance is cold and hollow? In alchemy, the transmutation of lead into gold was never a literal process, but a secret teaching about the awakening of the soul. True light is not the one that dazzles and seduces, but the one that illuminates without blinding. The adversary has always been the great examiner, the one who hands the poisoned cup to see if the initiate can discern nectar from venom. And so, in every tradition, in every path, this veiled figure appears, the great trickster who separates the wise from the foolish. The shamans of the Americas knew him as the divine trickster, the laughing deceiver who shatters human certainties with paradox. In Norse mythology, Loki was not merely a destroyer, but the weaver of chaos, pushing the gods toward their true destiny. If not all that glitters is gold, if not all that shines is truth, then how can one distinguish true light from false? The ancients left behind an answer, hidden in symbols, veiled in parables. Truth is not found in what is shown, but in what remains when all illusion dissolves. He who seeks truth outside himself is doomed to wander endless halls of mirrors. The adversary is not the enemy of man. He is the gatekeeper of the portals, the final enigma before crossing the threshold. Those who understand his role cease to fear him and begin to see. But those who mistake false light for truth, those who take illusion for reality, will wander in circles until the deception is undeniable. Perhaps the only way to defeat the adversary is to stop seeking battle. Perhaps the greatest trap of all is the belief that there is something to defeat. And in that moment, when the seeker stops seeking, when the illusion of the divide between light and shadow collapses, all that remains is the one truth that has never changed. They were never separate. They were always one and the same. Chapter 8. The Veil of Control. How Humanity Became Spiritual Slaves. The most perfect form of slavery is the one in which the prisoner does not know he is imprisoned. A man who knows he is in chains will sooner or later try to free himself. But the one who has been tamed by the illusion of freedom will never even suspect that he is bound. For centuries, humanity has been governed not only by laws and weapons, but by ideas that shape perception, mold consciousness, and push individuals further away from their true power. Man has been trained to accept submission with gratitude, to worship the walls of his prison, believing them to be the pillars of his salvation. The ancient sages warned of the great deception that keeps the soul asleep. In the Gospel of Philip, a text buried in the sands of time, a whisper survives. Many walk in darkness without knowing they are blind. If they do not awaken, their dwelling shall remain the night. This blindness is not of the eyes but of the mind, an inability to see the illusion in which humanity has been trapped. The Gnostic cosmology tells of a great deception. The demiurge and his archons, the architects of illusion, shaped the material world as a labyrinth designed to trap the divine spark in the illusion of separation. The Apocryphon of John, one of the most revealing texts of the lost Nag Hammadi scriptures, declares, "They imprisoned us in corruptible bodies and gave us a false god to worship." Religions, once paths to liberation, became instruments of control. The domestication of the soul is not done with visible chains, but with dogmas that impose limits on the mind, instill fear of divine punishment, and brand knowledge as dangerous. Man was taught not to question imposed truths, but to accept them as sacred law. Yet, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks to Arjuna with words that challenge this imposed servitude. "Lift yourself up by your own soul. Let not your spirit fall. The soul is its own friend and its own enemy." What greater control could exist than to convince man that his destiny does not belong to him? Spiritual slavery is not just about control. It is about convincing the prisoner to love his cage. It manifests in the idea that humanity is inherently unworthy. From the myth of the fall from Eden to the doctrine of original sin, we have been conditioned to believe that our very nature is corrupt, that we are born in debt to the divine, and that only through obedience and repentance can we be redeemed. But the oldest texts tell a different story. The Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, speaks not of man as a fallen being, but as a reflection of the cosmos itself. Man is the image of the universe, and within him lies every key to creation. Divinity is not something outside of us. It is our very essence, a truth that has been hidden, buried, erased, not to protect humanity, but to keep it enslaved. Is this not why systems of power have suppressed, ridiculed, and erased every piece of knowledge that speaks of the sovereignty of the soul? Even in modern science, echoes of this invisible prison remain. Quantum mechanics has revealed a profound secret. Consciousness affects matter. The observer changes the observed. If this is true, then the greatest secret ever hidden from humanity is that reality is malleable, that we are not mere passengers in the flow of time, but the architects of our own existence. Yet instead of being taught how to wield this power, we have been conditioned to doubt it. The illusion is so vast that even the search for truth itself has been turned into a trap. They have given us religions and philosophies that appear to liberate us, but in reality only reinforce the chains. The Tao Te Ching holds a warning, one that has gone unheard by many. When the sage sees truth, he follows it in silence. When the fool sees truth, he turns it into doctrine and forges chains with it. We are not slaves to fate. We are slaves to perception. The key has always been in our hands, but we were taught to believe it was locked away in temples, in sacred texts, in the hands of gods who watch us from afar. They taught us to kneel when we should have stood. They taught us to beg when we should have remembered that we already possessed everything. And now, the only question that remains is, will we wake up in time? For in the moment that consciousness recognizes itself as free, the chains dissolve, and in that instant, the illusion shatters forever. Chapter 9. The hidden message of Jesus and the silent teachings of the Masters. The silence of the desert holds truths that cannot be spoken in words. Between the wind that weaves through forgotten ruins and the sands that have buried ancient temples, a message lingers, waiting for those who can hear beyond the noise of history. It is the same teaching whispered in secret to those who were ready, the same knowledge veiled in symbols, in parables, in forgotten scriptures. The wise of all ages have known this. Truth is not shouted from pulpits. It is not written in stone, nor imposed by force. It does not belong to any one religion, nor does it demand worship. Truth is remembered. It is found where the mind ceases to search and the soul awakens to what it has always known. In the Gospels, in the manuscripts buried by time, and in the words of those who were condemned as heretics, there exists a secret that has survived, hidden beneath doctrines misunderstood by generations. Jesus did not come to build a religion. He came to awaken consciousness. "The kingdom of God is within you," he declared in the Gospel of Luke. A single phrase that carries the echo of every enlightened being who has ever walked the earth. The first Christians, those whose voices were silenced by councils and empires, understood that Christ's message was not a call to external worship, but an invitation to inner transformation. In the Gospel of Thomas, one of the most powerful revelations was nearly erased from history. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This was not about rituals or empty dogmas. It was about the divine spark sleeping within each human soul, waiting to be ignited. The same teaching can be found in the Vedic texts of the East. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna reveals, "The true masters, whether from the East or the West, never pointed to heaven as a distant place. They spoke of it as a state of consciousness, one that must be realized here and now. Yet history has shown that those who carry the torch of truth are often hunted, not because they raise armies, not because they seek to overthrow kings, but because their very existence threatens to collapse the structures of power." The Gospel of Judas, a text that defies the imposed narrative, contains a secret teaching. Jesus speaks not to the masses, but to those who can understand. "You belong to the lower realms, but I come from the ineffable kingdom, where the light has no end." The great teachers did not come to impose laws or to create a world of submission. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, upon attaining enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree, did not build temples. He did not demand worship. Instead, he taught the way to free oneself from illusion. The Dhammapada, one of the oldest Buddhist texts, holds a warning. Believe nothing simply because it is written in scriptures. Examine for yourself. When you find truth within, follow it. The idea that divinity is external, something separate from man, is the greatest deception in history. In the Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the hidden wisdom of the ancients is revealed. As above, so below. As within, so without. What does this mean if not that the entire cosmos is a reflection of consciousness? That man is a microcosm of the divine. Jesus spoke in parables not because the truth was too complex, but because only those ready to see beyond the words could understand. In the Gospel of Matthew, he tells his disciples, "To you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not." He was not hiding the truth out of cruelty. He knew that revelation cannot be imposed, it can only be discovered. Across history, humanity has mistaken worship for understanding. It has built temples in honor of the masters while ignoring their most essential teaching. Lao Tzu, the ancient sage of Taoism, left a warning in the Tao Te Ching. When the wise man points to the moon, the fool stares at the finger. And so it has always been. Humanity has stared at the finger of the prophets. It has created idols, constructed religions, and formed rituals, but it has forgotten the light they pointed toward. Why has the message of inner awakening been distorted? Because a truly conscious human being needs no intermediaries. He needs no priests, no dogmas, no spiritual authorities to dictate his path. And a free human soul is the greatest threat to those who seek to control the world. The great teachers were not messengers of a distant God. They were mirrors, reflections of what humanity could become when it awakens to its true nature. Their message is not locked away in ancient texts. It is not sealed in books written on paper. It lives in the spark within every soul, and so the question is no longer whether humanity is ready to receive the message. The true question is this: are we willing to remember what, deep down, we have always known? Chapter 10. Rewriting Reality, Returning to Divine Consciousness. The stars watch in silence, their light drifting through the vast abyss of time, bearing witness to a truth long forgotten by humanity. History is not an irreversible sequence of events, nor is it carved in stone. It is a mirror, a reflection of consciousness itself, shaped not by the past, but by the minds that perceive it. If the mind is the creator, then history is not fixed. It is not bound to books or records. It is inscribed in the fabric of reality itself, waiting to be rewritten. The ancients knew this. In the temples of Egypt, in the hymns of the Vedas, in the Gnostic codices hidden beneath the sands, the message remained the same. Human memory is fragmented because it was programmed to forget. What we call the past is nothing more than an echo of a sleeping consciousness, and what we call the future is a possibility yet to be anchored. But in the eternity of the present, everything can be reshaped. The sages of every tradition have spoken this truth in 1,000 different ways. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus proclaims, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." The truth is not external. It is not something to be found, but something to be remembered. It is a force that must be awakened from within. The one who remembers his divinity does not merely change the course of his own existence, he alters the very fabric of the universe. In the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes Trismegistus reveals to his disciple that the cosmos is mental, that everything in the physical world is a projection of a higher intelligence. The ancient wisdom texts echo the same revelation. As a man imagines in his heart, so shall his destiny be. History, then, is nothing more than the collective dream of humanity, and what is imagined with enough certainty will inevitably manifest. But how does one return to divine consciousness when everything in this world is designed to pull us away from it? The answer does not lie in external knowledge, nor in ancient books, nor in sacred rituals, but in the restoration of a memory buried deep within the soul. The Tao Te Ching warns, "The wise man does not accumulate knowledge. He lets it go until only the essential remains." Awakening is not about gathering more information, nor about learning something new. It is about unlearning the illusions that have obscured what has always been true. Separation was the great deception. The veil made us forget that there was never a true exile from divinity. Human consciousness did not fall. It was lulled into sleep. A dream so convincing, so intricately designed, that mankind came to believe in its own smallness. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers descend to impart forbidden knowledge, not as an act of mercy, but as a method of control. The fragmentation of wisdom was no accident. It was a deliberate strategy to prevent humanity from remembering its original power. But the illusion only holds power as long as the mind sustains it. The moment one individual awakens, the dream begins to fracture. That is why those who have reached this point in their journey can never turn back. As the Buddha once said, "The illusion is like a dream. When you wake up, you realize it was never real." Divine consciousness is not an unreachable state, nor is it a promise to be fulfilled in some distant afterlife. It is here, in this very moment, hidden in the space between thoughts, in the silent observer behind the mind, in the awareness that sees without identifying with the ego. The emerald tablet speaks its timeless truth. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. The macrocosm and the microcosm are one. The external world is a reflection of the internal world, but rewriting history requires more than understanding. It demands a radical transformation of perception. It is not enough to know that the world is a reflection of consciousness. one must live from that truth. And to do so is to break away from fear, from resignation, from the imposed narrative that convinces us that fate is already written. The Maya spoke of the Nagual, the aspect of being that can shift between realities, that can reconfigure the universe with pure intention. In the Popol Vuh, the creator gods shaped the first humans from corn, but they leave them with a warning. You are the reflection of your own thoughts. If you forget what you are, you will become a ghost in the world of shadows. There are no chains stronger than those that a person chooses to wear. The collective history of mankind has been written by the victors, by those who understood how to manipulate the consciousness of the masses. But each individual has the power to alter their own timeline, to collapse the infinite possibilities of the future into a reality that aligns with their true will. This is not about changing the past. It is about changing the way it is perceived. In the ancient temples of Eleusis, the initiates underwent a symbolic death of the ego, emerging reborn into a new consciousness. It was said that once they left the temple, they were never the same, because once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. And that is the key to rewriting history, to shift perception until the illusion collapses. The moment one ceases to believe in one's own smallness, the world itself is forced to adjust to that new vibration. Jesus once said, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." He was not speaking of moving physical mountains. He was speaking of restructuring reality itself, of reshaping existence through the power of unwavering certainty. So now, only one question remains. Are you ready to remember what you truly are? Are you ready to reclaim your place as the author of your story? Because the world as you know it only exists because you still believe in it. Epilogue: The Awakening and the Unwritten Path. The stars still burn in silence, watching without judgment, patient witnesses to the rise and fall of civilizations, the construction and destruction of illusions, the forgetting and the remembering. Time does not move forward, nor does it flow backward. It coils upon itself, spiraling through endless echoes of consciousness. Each life, each moment, each revelation is not an isolated event, but a thread woven into the vast and infinite tapestry of being. And now, here we stand at the threshold of remembrance. Every word spoken, every lost teaching, every whisper from the sages of old has led to this moment, not to a conclusion, but to a doorway. For the greatest secret is that there is no final truth, no absolute ending, no single revelation that will shatter all veils in one instant. The journey back to divine consciousness is not about arriving at a predetermined destination, nor is it about achieving some ultimate form of enlightenment. It is about remembering that we were never lost to begin with. The adversary, the illusion of separation, the veils of history, the distortions of knowledge, and the chains of spiritual slavery. They were never enemies. They were always the tests, the thresholds, the mirrors reflecting our own readiness to awaken. If there was a prison, it was made of thoughts. If there were chains, they were woven from beliefs. And if there was a key, it was always in our hands, waiting for the moment when we would see it for what it was. But now, the question remains. What happens when the seeker stops seeking? What remains when every imposed narrative collapses, when every structure of control is seen through, when every veil is lifted? What remains when the last illusion fades? The answer is not written in any scripture. It cannot be found in the words of the wise, nor in the doctrines of the ancients. It is not buried in lost temples nor hidden in forbidden texts, because the answer is you. It has always been you. Not the self you were taught to believe in, not the identity shaped by history or bound by name, not the mind filled with doubts and fears, but the presence beneath it all, the silent witness, the eternal consciousness that has been watching from the beginning, the one that was never separate, never small, never powerless. You were not born into this world to simply exist within a story that was already written. You came to rewrite the story itself. So now, the stars still wait, not to guide you, not to judge you, not to tell you what path to walk, but to see if you will finally realize what they have known all along, that the path was always yours to create.